Good evening. I'm Ann McLean from the library's concert office. It's a special pleasure tonight to welcome back the Miró Quartet to play our Stradivari instruments for the annual Antonio Stradivari Memorial Concert. It's great to have you here. Daniel Ching, William Fedkenheuer, John Largess, and in a moment, Joshua Gindele, who will be here. They're celebrating their 25th anniversary.
Thank you.
So this concert tonight is a very meaningful one for the library, related to the lineage of string quartets in America and to the larger history of chamber music in America, and that's definitely a major aspect of our history as well. So we are so pleased to have you recreating tonight from January 1910, a kind of salon evening performed in 1910 by the famous Kneisel String Quartet. And I know, John, particularly, you have researched this intensively. I wanted to ask you all to talk about this program and the fascinating project you have as one way to celebrate your anniversary.
Well, we thought, since we were turning 25 years old as a quartet, that, we actually sat down as a quartet when that was about to happen and said, well, what's been most important to us over the last 25 years? And a few things popped out. One of them actually was the Beethoven string quartets and the entire cycle, which we just recorded and we had been working on for 15 years, and that's been a big part of our 25 years. But also when we looked back on our past, our mentors and the older artists we worked with as a young quartet, our teachers that we worked with when we were all young players before we became a quartet, and then the older quartets that we had heard as young players that inspired us to do what we do. This mentorship, this lineage, this continuity of history that we felt so lucky as individuals and as a quartet to have received and been part of. We thought celebrating that history and celebrating that lineage, as well as making sure we're passing it on to our students and our young quartets that we mentor. And that's sort of where the beginning of the archive project idea came from.
Yeah, I think before we knew that the 25th anniversary for our quartet was coming, but we hadn't really thought about what it was. What did that mean to us, and maybe to the people that listen to us? When you start out as a young quartet, you're just busy trying to just make it. You want to play this music, you want people to hire you, you want to go out there. But now that we've been doing this for a while, and that's no longer, at least for us, really on the forefront of our mind, now we've kind of shifted into a place where we feel like, okay, we're becoming part of this string quartet history, and as John mentioned, we are now in a place where it's somewhat of a responsibility, but a big honor for us to be part of this lineage. And we would hope in 100 years that people would look at Miró Quartet programs and kind of say, hey, what did they do that was interesting? And maybe we can kind of recreate it. But looking at these quartets that we've been exploring, like the Kneisel, it's really interesting. Tonight's program, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but it isn't what we're used to seeing as standard string quartet programs where you have 3 or 4 complete works. What they did, and this was over 100 years ago, it seems groundbreaking, but they did this already, is take 2 big pieces, the Mozart and the Schubert, and those are the bookends, but in between, you kind of give the audience a little taste of everything. And what we forget about looking at the context of these works, the Survey, the Franck, and the Glière, is that for them that's a lot of music that was written pretty recent to when they were playing. So it was, in their way, they felt kind of responsible for saying, look at these composers. We know Mozart, we know, we knew Schubert, we know Beethoven, all the big guys, but we're still here as a quartet, and we need to champion these other great composers that nobody really is listening to, these string quartets. And even today, now 100 years later, we're looking at these works, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard the Glière Quartet or have heard the Franck. So as a string quartet that's concertizing, it's our kind of our mission to still carry that on, even though they started this 100 years ago. There's other great music besides these composers that we're always playing, now with Beethoven just around the corner as well.
The Franck is not even so often done by anyone done these days. I was looking at our records, and since the 80s, it's been hardly done once or twice.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's a big piece.
An hour long or so.
An hour long.
And you played it in its entirety?
We have not. We have read it. We have played it for ourselves in private because that's an important part of getting to know how you might shape the movement. But I think that's part of the issue that we run into even today, that they were running into then, is you have such a wealth of string quartet core repertoire that you can play. And you really can't, over even the lifetime of 40 or 50 years, if you think about even the Juilliard Quartet, which is now almost in their 60th year, it's impossible to play all of these great works. And so one of the other things that really was exciting for us was this ability to get to know and to share these works without having to bring along a large quartet. The other thing that's changed a lot is the touring exercise that we go through with the invention of planes and faster trains and automobiles. If you think back to 1910, their travel was much, much different. And so the amount of concerts and their ability to get from place to place, we now play 100 to 120 concerts a year, with just over 200 days on the road. And so the amount of repertoire that we carry to insert another hour-long piece is actually an incredible amount of energy and work, and not possible in many senses. And so this allows us to even explore our own artistry and bring that then to Beethoven and Mozart and Schubert, which is really exciting.
Another thing about this program and those movements, which I think is good for our audience today to keep in mind, is that it has been, as research will show, it has been much more normal for chamber music concerts over the last 250 years, or even 300 years, to program movements of things than any complete works. Most of Schubert's performances of his own pieces for his friends the first time, they'd play only one movement of quartet, one or two songs, one or two dances, and that was a normal way to hear things. On the flip side, more so than we were used to, a typical Beethoven subscription concert in Vienna, he would sign out a hall for the entire day, and the premiere of the Ninth Symphony, for example, was preceded by a selection of 4 short movements from Missa Solemnis with soloists and chorus, and that's almost 45 minutes of preliminary work, and then you're supposed to hear that in the entire Ninth Symphony. There was a lot more flexibility with audiences and composers in how much time we would offer the audience. 3 hours or 4 hours would not be unusual if you knew that was coming, or only an hour. And that kind of flexibility in listening and programming is something actually that we've gotten away from at least in the United States in these last 20 years, for better or for worse. And it's nice to have an opportunity to do things differently.
Oh, they didn't have to check their Facebook, so
That's
they could listen to a 4-hour concert and feel okay about it.
There was no stage unions at hour 5 telling them they had to go move all the stairs off the stage and stuff like that.
Well, that was one of my questions for you, was what has changed for us, and what kind of codification or conventionalization has taken place during this point of time that we feel like we can only present formal chunks of music.
Right.
And you were saying that until the beginning of the 20th century, there was no real idea that in order to be considered a serious concert,
Right.
artists had to present a whole complete work, or only complete works on it, which is interesting to me. So what do you think has changed? You say Facebook, but I hate to say shorter attention spans, but I don't know, what else?
Well, I'm curious what you think, but I do think that there was a tendency in this period, 1910, during the salon concert kind of phase, for individual artists, soloists even, to want to really present their own personality in a concert. And for them, that meant often choosing their favorite movements and favorite pieces. They felt like they could show more of themselves. And maybe, again, for better or for worse, I think in our day and age, we feel like we're supposed to be showcasing the music with our personality, maybe secondary to that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's a very good point.
The other thing I was thinking about is, and important to tonight's quartet itself, the Kneisel Quartet, is they really were the first professional touring quartet in North America. And so up until this time, concerts were put on by musicians who were both good and not good, and amateurs and professionals who were having fun. And they would get together in the morning or in the afternoon and play repertoire that they could just then play that afternoon or evening. And with Kneisel Quartet, what was an important pivot point in history for string quartets is Kneisel himself and the quartet, they were principal players of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and they wanted to bring the level of playing that they were hearing in the orchestral and symphonic world into chamber music and raise the level not only of the technique but of the artistry and of what we were experiencing. And with that, I think you start to then see a flourishing of quartets under their leadership. Over 40 quartets, professional quartets, Juilliard Quartet themselves, the Coolidge Quartet, were groomed under Kneisel, and so you have this raising of the level of what is then expected and wanted from both artists and an audience. And I think that too, then you start to get into a place where what kind of rehearsal time is possible, how much repertoire is possible to raise to that kind of level, and some of these issues that we still deal with today. But it starts to really focus then, well, what kind of programming are you doing? And at the same time, hopefully, when you finally reach that level, leaves room for improvisation still.
You know, I was going to ask you about, you've researched Kneisel himself, and I was wondering, were they recruited from Germany, the four of them?
There was I forget his name off the top of my head, the gentleman who funded the Boston Symphony Orchestra in Boston. He was a wealthy businessman, and he was highly involved in bringing a lot of the players, and that was actually almost all of the woodwinds, for example, from Europe. There weren't any great professional oboists in the United States in 1880. There was no schools for them to study at. There was, if any Americans who were interested, usually would go to Germany, go to Berlin, or go to the Paris Conservatory. And so, yes, he was recruited, and he brought a lot of people with him that he knew. So Louis Vicensky, who was the violist who played in the Kneisel Quartet the entire career of the quartet, was a friend of his that he had brought also, I think, from Vienna. And they had a sequence of second violinists over time.
And cellists.
And cellists. But Alvin Schroeder, who is the first cellist of the quartet and was the first principal of the Boston Symphony, was also specifically recruited. He was quite a well-known soloist. That's something we didn't mention in this quartet, is that it became a tradition with the Kneisel Quartet in all of their programming almost, when they toured away from Boston and New York particularly, to have a cello solo. And this tradition lasted even after Alvin Schroeder left the group. And so by this point in 1910, for the program we were playing, Willem Willeke would have been playing cello, and they still had him play all kinds of solo pieces and stuff all the way up to the end.
And you're playing one of those pieces tonight. You were just trying it out on our Castle Barco cello, which sounded incredible.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. I was finishing up a rehearsal, and then I needed to get myself looking somewhat presentable because I was sweating profusely from all the acrobatics. Well, and just the pieces, a lot of what he played. I mean, he did play movements from Bach suites. They often would program things that were a little simpler, but they also programmed a lot of very showy, virtuosic kind of, just to trot the cellist out and show everybody what he could do, which is a lot of fun for me.
Were you guys, when you grew up in Boston, was Kneisel still a figure that you heard about?
Well,
of course we know
so
about
for me, Kneisel Hall in Maine, which is a summer chamber music festival, I heard about it from a young age. A lot of friends of mine went there in the summers, and one of my first teachers when I was starting at the Langy School of Music, the violinist and teacher Roman Totenberg, whose daughter Nina Totenberg you might know from NPR, he was actually directing the chamber music program there for the decades that I was a young student, and a lot of people I knew got their first chamber music training working with him and went to their first chamber music festival in the summer there in the
I
summertime.
knew about the festival, but I didn't know how long his presence was so important there. My goodness. And this program you're doing tonight was from 1910, right, at the Schubert Club.
That's right.
Yeah, you may not follow the Schubert Club, but it's a famous institution in Minnesota that is they say, the oldest continuously running chamber series in the U.S. It's very venerable, and this was done by the Kneisel Quartet there. And by the way, we were going back and forth, Kneisel and Kneisel, because people in the know say Kneisel,
Yeah,
because
I
that's
think
how
it's
he
Kneisel,
pronounced
yes.
his name. Well, you know, there's so many things I'd love to talk with you about that regarded this history, but I also wanted to talk with you about some things that I learned from watching an interview with you about leadership in the quartet. And you were saying that the first violinists help to create the arc, define the arc of a work, but that all of you play a role in the leadership of the quartet. And I love this style of thinking. I wanted you to expound on that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. Well, for me, an eye-opening part of my own growth with string quartet playing was really getting into the fabric and the four of us really working on leadership dynamics within the quartet. I had grown up watching these famous quartets and always thought, of course, you know, the first violinist is doing everything, and this person is amazing.
Naturally.
And, you know, then I was a first violinist. I did the same, and then I was a second violinist. I was like, well, wait, how is this working? What? But for us, when we work on our leadership dynamics, we really see it as four very equal parts, and a lot of the times, actually, most of the leadership dynamic is coming from everywhere but the first violinist. And what we sort of isolate ourselves into different traditional roles that suit the traditional Haydn quartet, where the cello basically goes bum, bum, and the middle voices go bum, chuck, 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 boom, chuck. Isn't this fun? And the first violin then plays this beautiful melody, and we're all mesmerized. But really, those roles then rotate around, especially as you get into Beethoven and Schubert and all of these. So what we look for then is how is the framework of the quartet actually supporting so that the thematic material doesn't have to do anything but sound good. And so a lot of times the structure and the leadership of the quartet is coming from the cello and the combination of viola and second violin so that we can release the first violin to really just have fun and enjoy what is going on. There's a lot of very close dynamics and communication that's going on, but at least then we can be very clear and quick without having to talk about it on stage.
That was fascinating. I've never heard people talk about it quite like this. And you said most of the time it's someone other than the first violinist who might be leading at that particular moment. Yeah. And the interiority of it is supported by all four of you, which is wonderful.
One of the visuals that we like to think about, there's the older version of a string quartet is like a bottle of wine. And the cello is the bottle, the glass that holds everything together. And the first violin is the label, which everybody buys it for the label. But what you're really after is the wine, which is the second violin and viola. And that's a wonderful visual for it. The other visual that we use for leadership dynamics is that the cello really is the foundation of your house. If you need to have a solid foundation that really is going to be able to support what you're going to build on top of it, and that the second violin and the viola really provide the ceiling and the walls. And if it doesn't look right, you're not going to want to go in there. So that framework has to be able to move and has a lot of flexibility, but also has some real definition to it. And then the first violin can come in and decorate the interior and the landscape however they see fit, and whoever that is. And so it's part of that structure that we gain from the score itself, but also something that we found to be really, really useful in getting melodic material and our artistry itself to have a lot of flexibility.
You know, I was thinking about the pictures I saw of the four of you in relation to your talking about the structure and learning of how to take on different leadership roles. I have to say, you should check out their website because I've seen a lot of publicity photos in my work, and these guys have the best looking, sharpest, most colorful individual photos. You know, usually you see posed, this is going somewhere, by the way, you see posed pictures of people with all the four people together as an ensemble and so forth, but they have individual photos that have beautiful colors, sharp outfits like this. So what I'm getting at is you, in watching you and thinking about you, you have such a formidable relationship as a group of 4 people. And you've talked about this, all of you, in your different interviews and so on. And you've talked about sharing fun things, activities. Each of you has a wonderful outside interest. One of you is a fly fisherman, I believe, and you're a pastry cook. Perhaps we could talk about this. And by the way, you've described this program as a tasting menu for tonight. But I would just like to hear a little bit from each of you about how you view the quartet, how you've developed your friendship as an ensemble.
Yeah, when we began the quartet 25 years ago, we were four very strong musical personalities and individual personalities. And we didn't have the skills to really work through some of the disagreements that we would have personally and as musicians. So very early on, our goal was primarily to come up with a great working environment and have mutual respect within the group so that when these disagreements did happen or we came to head about something, that we realized that we weren't being personally affronted by something, but otherwise we were trying to figure out the best musical concept, and that everybody was really after the same goal, which was just to make the quartet sound great. A lot of quartets struggle with their personal relationships because it's a very close relationship. We travel together, we stay in hotels together, we work hours and hours a day together. So really our primary goal early on was just to take care of the personal relationships, give each other space to be ourselves, give each other room and flexibility to deal with certain things in our lives, like, you know, if we have families and children, requires a lot of flexibility in how we do business. So that was really to sort of have a non-hierarchical working relationship that had a lot of respect with each other. And I think it's been really great because we do get along quite well, and we are really now still 4 very different musical personalities. But we've learned a working relationship that is very healthy, I think. And it's the reason that we've been able to play together for so long and not come to a head like so many other groups do. Or you hear stories of groups, you know, they don't travel together, they stay in different hotels, they never know when they're going to show up at the hall. We were telling that story the other day. Just because all they do is work together, and that's it. And so that was really our primary focus early on, which I think established a really healthy way of working for the 4 of us.
Well, it's interesting to contrast this with the Kneisel Quartet themselves. I actually was looking through a book with these guys in Houston. It was a copy of a doctoral thesis in Indiana where they did a bunch of research on the Kneisel Quartet, and I found out talk about hierarchical, what the 4 quartet members were being paid in 1910 during the year that we're playing this program from. You have to keep in mind that the annual salary that they had was, of course, in $1910, so you have to multiply everything by like $24.97 to be equivalent to today's prices. But the first violinist, whose name, Franz Kneisel, was on the group, he got paid $9,000 a year. The cellist and the violist got paid $6,000 a year.
And you guessed it, the second violin was taking in 20 grand.
Unfortunately, he was getting paid $5,000 a year. So he got paid less than even the cellist and the violist. I think it was partly because he was maybe the youngest person, the most recent. But it's interesting that they definitely felt at this time, musically, that the first violinist was the leader. And actually, that's still the name in Britain for, they don't call first violin, second violin. They call the first violinist the leader, you know, of the quartet. The leader of your quartet is the first violin, whether he's leading or cueing in the concert or not. So there is definitely a tradition, and that is something I don't think you'll see with us on stage tonight necessarily. But maybe we'll have to change ourselves to the Ching Quartet.
I have proposed that before.
Yes, yes, leader.
So do you ever socialize together? I know we'll talk about your projects in a minute. I know you really like community projects, and you're a lot of very intriguing ones. But I'm just curious, you've said you have 3 wives in the quartet. Do you ever socialize with your three wives and their
Wow.
wives?
Whenever anybody brings up a past interview, I always kind of wonder, well, where's this going? Yeah, no, sometimes I think we all joke about our three wives because oftentimes we see these three other partners of ours a lot more than our actual partners in life. And, you know, we were doing about 120 concerts a year, which was over 200 days on the road, and we've now scaled that back to about 100. But we socialize quite a bit.
I think that's true.
There are several pictures. When we were in what was that with the big steak challenge? What was that?
Amarillo.
Amarillo. Oh, this was.
That's
so
socialization? That's what you think about socializing?
We were in Amarillo, Texas, and we had a concert, and then we had a community engagement for a bunch of kids in the morning. We couldn't get a flight out till later, and so one of us saw the 72-ounce steak challenge. In
This is
Amarillo.
Texas, after all.
And free steak if you ate the whole thing. And we thought, well, we're a string quartet. And so, yeah, we spent, 2 hours at the restaurant? What they don't tell you is, so you sit down at a regular table, and you order this 72-ounce steak challenge, and then they make you sign a contract, and they make you pay for it, saying that, you know, if something medically goes wrong, you're okay with it. And then they say, all right, well, let's go. And you're sitting there going, what do you mean? We're at the table. And they have a special stage in the middle of the restaurant with spotlights and like sports timers and an internet feed. And so yeah, the 3 members of the quartet attempted the 72-ounce steak challenge. And 3 members of the quartet failed at the 72-ounce steak challenge, but 1 came closest.
Really? Would
Yeah.
you like to reveal? Or
I don't know, should we reveal?
Who do you think?
Who would you guess, Ann?
I would.
Who sat out and who ate the most?
Oh my goodness! I don't know. I can't say.
So Josh over here looked at us and said we were crazy, and so he sat down on the lower level, and you become famous in the restaurant because everybody comes up to take pictures with you and see this. So Josh sat out. I gave up halfway through because I was looking at it. I was like, I'm not going to make it.
And then walked over to me and said, "Could you get me some ice cream?"
It's really good ice cream. Daniel came in second. I think I ate, 48 ounces, and you ate 54 ounces, and John, largesse.
I only had 4 ounces of steak left.
Yeah. But I ate the battered shrimp, which was like a fat
Yes.
bomb in your belly.
You have to eat-
if you're going to do it, don't eat the
Don't
shrimp.
eat the shrimp. You have to eat the steak and a salad and a roll and 3 fried shrimp
in
and a
an
potato.
hour.
The baked potato nobody was going to touch
Yeah,
that baked potato.
baked
There's
potato.
no way.
And there was a timer. So what, you had 90 minutes? Was that how long it
No,
was?
60 minutes.
Only 60 minutes.
And they're
yeah.
like ticking it, and you can only touch your water. You're not allowed to touch anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I appreciate this background.
So
You're a little insight
we
to.
we do socialize together, but in extreme ways.
You asked.
We like
We got a
food.
ton of those.
We have to hurry up and get into some core repertoire type of questions here to make up maybe to a little time. But back to tonight's program. But before we get to tonight's program, about the Beethoven project you did with T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. That was to me a fascinating. They have a whole history of very interesting, intriguing projects that are both contemporary composers and, of course, the great classic of the repertoire and so on. So this one, tell us about how you got to that quartet. Did you just dream it up, that project, rather?
We were asked at Chamber Society, right? Stephen Delane was the actor.
It was the White Nights Festival,
White Nights
and they were. I think it's still going on every winter. And Stephen Delane, who some of you may know, I think he didn't play the lead, but in the John Adams, the PBS Adams series, he was one of the main characters in that series.
Game of Thrones.
And Game of
too.
Thrones. He's moving on.
He was
up.
one of the Baratheons, right?
I haven't watched the show yet. Anyway, Stephen Delane had started to kind of work on this project, and it was that he was going to memorize T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, which is over 70 minutes of this amazing poetry, and he and some directors at the Chamber Music at the Lincoln Center had this idea of, because the Opus 132 quartet of Beethoven is mentioned only for a brief moment in one of the poems in 4 quartets. So they said, why not have the Miró Quartet come and play this, and then actually they had Stephen actually recite the poem first, and then we came out and played this thing. And for us to play the Opus 132 is always an amazing experience. But what was amazing was watching this man get up there for an hour on a dark stage and recite this entire thing from memory. And I mean, it was very moving. And then for us to come out and play it, it just put it in a totally different context. So I think that was quite an amazing thing. We've talked about doing it again, but we've gotten busy and he's gotten really busy. And it's come up a couple of times. I think we've done it a few times since then. But it's I don't know if they have a video of it somewhere, but just watching his performance of this is pretty extraordinary. It's amazing. He has nobody to lean on. It's just him up there.
There was this, in the review of this, which I just was fascinated by this comment, it said that Eliot wrote in 1933 that he wanted to get beyond poetry as Beethoven in his later work strove to get beyond music. I've never heard that line anywhere. Well, let's talk about your Beethoven recordings on pentatone, because for your anniversary year and the Beethoven year, you've made the whole cycle. Is this the first time you recorded the whole cycle?
Yes, and it astonishes me that quartets have recorded multiple cycles, because it is such a huge undertaking to record all 16 quartets. It's about 8 hours of music, and is it? It's more. It's more? Yeah.
It's 16 hours. 16? Yeah, 16
Oh,
hours.
is it really? Yeah. It's just massive.
It's a lot of music.
Yeah, we actually recorded it over the course of a number of years. Initially with the idea that we would record the early quartets when Beethoven, the Opus 18 quartets, when Beethoven, at the same age that Beethoven was when he wrote them. So we recorded those in 2004 and actually released them in 2005. And then the middles and late quartets have all happened in the last 7 years. But we basically have gone into the studio once or twice a year to record these pieces, and it's really one of those great landmarks for any string quartet. One of the things that it's like sort of climbing Mount Everest for a string quartet is to be able to play and record all of these incredible works. So it just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's just one of those things we're really proud of as a quartet. And the timing is perfect, because it's the Beethoven's 250th in 2020, so it worked out very well for us too.
And you have a background as a recording engineer. Am I wrong on that?
No, actually, there was a time when I was doing my master's, I was actually doing some studies with some of the engineers from Telarc. I don't know if you guys remember that label. It's now unfortunately gone, but they were one of the first labels to do these all digital recordings. They did the Cincinnati Pops and the Cincinnati Orchestra. They're based in Ohio, and then they started recording a lot of. They actually did a Beethoven cycle with the last formation of the Cleveland Quartet with Bill Prussell and James Dunham. And what was amazing working on that was just how you started to listen. You listen differently, recording engineers, they're listening to it totally differently than any of us in the room would listen to it. We listen to it out in the hall and everything, but they've got their microphones really close. They're really engineering the sound that is being captured. So it's not just a simple, like, we're putting the microphones and this, but they've got all these this great equipment with vacuum tubes, and they have arguments about what kind of microphones to use and everything. So every engineer has their own sound, and Jack Renner, who was the lead engineer of Telarc, had just this amazing ear for the sound that he was trying to create, and he also was very much this minimalist microphoning kind of guy. He said, I go in and see an engineer and he's got 30 microphones on one piano, and you're like, why are you doing this? He was very much into just 2 if you can. So for a string quartet, he really just used 2 microphones, but it was carefully placed because we only have 2 ears, right? So you don't need 30 microphones. That was his take on it. So I learned a lot just doing that. When the quartet started getting busy, I actually engineered our first album when we were students and had no money. So
That was our
I was
first
cheap.
promotional album. Yeah, it was good.
I was free.
We spent a long time in the basement
The
doing that.
microphone thing that's the way both the Budapest and the Juilliard were recorded here, and they did release some out. We have released some albums from their work on stage here. What do you think in terms of the Beethoven quartets, do you feel that they remain just as challenging for all young quartets, for your students? And then are there ways in which the contemporary music that you have played so strongly and championed, does this influence the way you think about Beethoven now and for your teaching?
I mean, I'll answer the latter question. I think that we approach contemporary music like we approach Beethoven. We kind of try to look at it as classically as we can, see if there's structure in it that makes sense, if there's sort of technical things that maybe, you know, everybody has the echoes of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Shostakovich, Bartók, all the great quartet composers in their minds when they're writing stuff for us. So we're constantly looking for little echoes of that in the new music that we play, so that it brings a little familiarity for the language to our listeners. I think if we approach it maybe the other way, I think it would be a little harder to digest for our audiences. So I think the other way around for contemporary music is looking at it through the lens of Beethoven or Haydn.
And I might also say that we do try to take some inspiration from our mentors, the Juilliard Quartet, way back. And Bobby Mann would always say that you could go to a work like Beethoven's Grosse Fuge, and it's as contemporary today as it was when he composed it, and to look for what makes it new and interesting and shocking and creative and of its time, even in a piece that we might, or a composer we might assume is, familiar to everyone. That also is a great perspective that we can bring to some of this music. And I do feel like the more we've spent time, particularly with the late quartets of Beethoven, there's a lot of weird stuff in there. It's beautiful now and familiar, but weird stuff. And it should be played that way.
You know, Bobby had a transcription of the Grosse Fuge for string quartet. Did he ever show you that? Which is kind of, for piano, for piano four hands, of the Grosse Fuge quartet for piano four hands, and he used to teach from that, as I understand it.
Yeah, well, and we've heard a few performances of it, which is fascinating, because also, like, there's an orchestral arrangement of it as well. It's just a very different piece, and the way the sound is produced in the tension, or the release of that tension, is very different in the piano version as well as in the orchestra version. It's always fun in the orchestra version because a lot of those players have played it, but it is such a different beast when you've got 12 violins in a section. And there's the room for somebody getting just a little bit off is just exponentially expressed there. As far as your first question about students and the challenge of Beethoven, I would answer that by saying the four of us are still challenged by Beethoven. And that is the depth and the essence of what I think is so unique and so incredible about these quartets of Beethoven, is they do challenge each individual on its own, and then every part of the fabric of what it means to play chamber music and be in a string quartet. And so it's wonderful to be able to pass and share what we've learned and sort of be keepers of this knowledge that has been passed on to us. And also it provides these moments of humor when you hear your students attempt, Opus 95 for the first time. And it reminds you of just how challenging these works are, and how far we've come with our own struggles, and yet how far we still have to go. And that's also what's so inspiring, is you can continue to learn and grow and express your own artistry and the voice of the Miró Quartet. At the same time, listening to other quartets who are also expressing their own voice. And each time these quartets have that kind of impact. And I find for us, I think in all of the core repertoire that we love to play, and when we look for new music and commissions, we're looking for composers who are going to have that same impact. So that the pieces we commission are part of the lasting repertoire, that they have that kind of impact and depth.
I know Kevin Putz is someone you've worked with. What other composers are you involved with these days?
So right now, we just had a piece by Kevin Putz titled Home, which we premiered, and we're in the middle of finishing up the commissioning partners. We have a new one coming from Caroline Shaw, who is actually a close friend of ours, and we've worked with already. And we have another one coming the year after that by a composer who's also very much in the opera world, Jake Heggie, who's done incredible work there. We've done small little pieces of his and have just loved them. And so there's different ones in the pipeline like that, alongside in the past, Gunther Schuller, who I know is a fan here, and many others.
That's great. We know where you have to get ready and perform very shortly. Bringing it back to your program tonight for just a moment, two thoughts on Schubert. People talk about the opening chords of the Schubert as being some of the most difficult to bring off. Those, would you like to say anything about those, your work on them?
I wasn't worried about him until she said something.
Like, really?
Now we're not going to
No.
be able to play it. I can see where that comes from. I mean, the writing of those first 4 bars is in some ways the most economical thing that he certainly wrote, but it's also at the same time the most emotionally charged, and you have to do it together as one. And so, there's no rhythm before it, there's nothing happening before, and you just have to start with this thing. So it's I can see where definitely that stigma of it being really challenging, and there's so many different ways to play it. And I think we have one of the more unique ways of playing it. I think you will not see another quartet play the way we do, because this is a piece that we've played since our first year together, and it was a moment with Isaac Stern. We were studying with him in Israel, and we were, as you were bringing up, having some challenges with the opening of it. He's like, he flipped it on its head and he said, "You are like everybody else. You're all starting this down bow. Let's try this up." And we looked at him like, "Oh my gosh, but this is a downbeat, And we haven't stopped playing it up bow in 25 years, and it works great. So he knew what he was doing.
I think it's also, I don't want to draw attention to the first 4 bars.
This is getting more and more
There's no- there's-
exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
let's keep going.
But what's interesting, because we're playing on 4 different instruments tonight than we're used to playing, and that actually does bring some complications into the balance of those. Well, I mean, balance of everything, but those first 4 bars in particular. So it is something that we discussed. We did work on those first 4 bars because the instrument, the quality of the instrument, how they're projecting each individual instrument, changes how we have to sort of adjust things ever so slightly. And so there's a little more added complication in having instruments that we're not as familiar with.
Well, I can't resist asking you, I know you've recorded your Transcendence project on 2 Guarneri instruments and 2 Stradivari instruments, so I can't resist, maybe I should ask you afterwards, but how does it compare with 4 Strads? What are you thinking? Schubert on 4 Strads.
You know what's interesting for me as the violist in this group, and I do think this is true for violists in general, is that there's such a variety of shapes, sizes, proportions of violas out there. It seems to be the one of the string instruments. I know cellos can vary quite a lot. Violins tend to not vary much at all. And it seems even now in contemporary making, you'll see violas that are 15 inches long, 18 inches long, fat, short, pieces cut out of the side. And I know it's interesting for me whenever we do this here, because that Strad viola is a totally different size and shape than the viola that I play normally, which is a modern French instrument. It's also a totally different shape and size than that Guarneri viola I played in that recording you're referring to, even though it's not separated by all that much space in time or geographical space, the 2 instruments, they feel totally different. So I always kind of have to have fun with exploring a whole different way of approaching the instrument and the role of the voice in the quartet, which I think is very interesting, very fun.
You know what I would say, Anne, is to really be able to compare them, we'd probably need to take the instruments for a while. And that, then we
really,
could
for a
really
few
have a
years,
good discussion, maybe 21, 2022, something like that. We could talk about
After-
that later, though.
You guys are great. It's really fun to talk with you about all these things, both substantive and fun and silly and everything. But do you have time for 2 or 3 questions, or what do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe 3 questions. Who has one?
Is the microphone work? No. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could just briefly talk about your seating configuration, because you sit with the two violins on the outside, and I think that could be really interesting for the audience because most quartets don't necessarily sit like that these days. So if you could just talk briefly about how you came to this particular seating arrangement that you're playing tonight.
So what he's referring to, he has seen us perform before, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been sitting with. Usually, you'll see the violins on if you're facing the quartet on the left side, both violins together, because they play together most of the time, and you're trying to blend the two together and almost not be able to tell which one is playing. We sit with the violins facing each other, so he is sitting where you'd normally see a cello or a viola. And then the cello is sitting right next to me, next to the first violin, and the viola in between there. And this was kind of it came out of one rehearsal where we had been working on a piece, and we kind of things were getting a little stale at that moment, and we said, hey, we need to shake these up. Let's try sitting in a different way. And we tried all kinds of different things, and quartet, I mean, there's 4 of us, there's only so many different combinations you could do. That makes sense. But when we got to this one, there was something immediately kind of enlightening, and also just kind of what was amazing was that it put the viola and second violin immediately together, which is always a challenge in the seating that we had, because they're usually across from each other. So there's always a difficulty kind of connecting that way. They had that connection. There was an ease for both of us to separate our voices, because the violins play together so much of the time. Sometimes we feel like we're just locked together all the time, and we want it, especially in the second violin voice, there's so much interesting writing in the second violin voice that a lot of time gets lost. And putting it in its own space, putting him out there, he has the freedom and the space to really actually give personality and space to his own line. The challenge obviously is when we do play together, there's a lot more distance. So but what we thought we were onto something really kind of amazing and groundbreaking and everything, and then within, I think, the month that we had tried it, we were playing at the Oberlin Conservatory where the group started, and one of a lady came up after our performance. She said, if you're still here tomorrow morning, I want to show you something. I'm the librarian at the conservatory. I was like, as a freshman, I worked in the library. This is so great. I get to meet the new librarian. I have a book that just came into my possession. It's from 1870 something, and I need you to see this. And so she brought us the next morning and opened up the book. She took it out of the sleeve, and she said, this is a really interesting thing. It's like, when we go to like a grocery store and you have the People's Magazine year-round wrap-up of the great people of that year. Here you have a book of the 30 great German performing string quartets. And each one had its own photo and a profile. So it was like a lookbook of all the current. And what was amazing, there were 2 really amazing things. One was 3 of the quartets were all women out of the 30, which was actually, we would have never have even guessed that in that point of time that would be existing. And the other one was that more than half the quartets sat the way we sat. We don't talk about it because we only know more recent history, 50, 70 years, but this is more than 100 years ago, 104 years ago. And so immediately we're like, well, number one, we're not as inventive as we thought we were, because they did this already. But number 2, there was something to it, and I think composers back then heard quartets playing that way, and so we've loved it. And for some of you maybe hearing it for the first time, we hope that you get something new out of it, even out of a piece that you've heard a lot.
And if you're curious, the Kneisel Quartet did indeed sit this way. Yep, as their photos show.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you've considered doing something kind of modern in the vein of, Luca Vito Einaudi, or Max Richter, Olafur Arnolds, Michael Nyman, anything like that. If not a soundtrack, something that you mentioned some commissioned work, but do you do original work as well? Do you compose your own works as well, and what do they sound like?
We don't really compose. We all have enough of an education in music and theory and everything to do something, although we try to leave that up to the pros. A couple of us do some arranging, And so that's, a sort of a small aspect of putting things on stage that are our own. But we don't do a lot of composing per se.
We've been approached in different situations, and we always pursue it with interest, to do some film productions and different projects like that. And it's generally what's always interesting to see how it unfolds and where it goes. And a lot of times, with big movie film productions, they have such a set schedule where they need us. And our schedule, luckily, for us, is already booked out 1 to 2 years. A lot of times, those types of projects are working on a much shorter time frame. And so really where we've had trouble being able to get engaged with many of them is that what they need and when they need it by isn't possible within the structure of where our lives currently are. But it's always something that we're fascinated by. There's been some really exciting ones that haven't worked out.
One more, or this is a good stopping point? I think maybe people are anxious to hear you perform this concert. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.